Before the story begins, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bring you even more compelling stories. Sitting in my sunlit, ultra-modern tech office, I stared at the massive $50 million buyout offer lying perfectly on my desk. It was personally signed by my former mother-in-law, the exact same arrogant woman who 5 years ago ruthlessly physically pushed my deaf son out of a grand family portrait because his hearing aids ruined her twisted image of high society perfection. She desperately wants to buy my tech empire to save her dying reputation. But she is about to learn that a mother's vengeance is brutally absolute. My name is Maya. When my son Sam was born entirely deaf, my world shifted into a terrifying, yet beautiful new dimension. I spent countless agonizing hours learning complex sign language, attending specialized medical therapies, and fighting tirelessly to ensure he never felt lesser than anyone else. He has my whole heart. I have spent every waking moment making sure he knows he is unconditionally loved and belongs in this world. But my husband's family, the illustrious, obscenely wealthy Sterling dynasty, viewed my beautiful boy as a defective genetic embarrassment. There were always little cruel comments at their grand family dinners, sharp, judgmental whispers when Sam would use his hands to communicate. I always told myself I was overreacting, forcing myself to endure the quiet disrespect for the sake of keeping the family together. The absolute nightmare culminated at the Sterling Corporation's 50th anniversary gala. It was a suffocatingly opulent event held at their sprawling estate. The massive mansion smelled of expensive champagne, rare orchids, and cold arrogance. It was filled with local politicians, relentless paparazzi, and ruthless business elites wearing fake, plastered smiles. Sam, who was only 6 at the time, was wearing his new, highly visible cochlear implants. He was beyond excited. He had picked out a little velvet tuxedo just for this night, and he was so incredibly proud of the devices resting behind his ears. He thought they made him look like a superhero. For a fleeting moment, standing in the grand foyer, I allowed myself to desperately hope that this would be a good night. About an hour into the evening, the massive hired photography crew corralled the entire extended family onto the grand marble staircase for the official dynasty portrait. Sam excitedly ran forward to stand right next to his grandmother, Eleanor. He was gentle, not pushing, just reaching out with that pure, innocent 6-year-old's eagerness to belong to the people he was told were his family. Before his little shoes even settled on the marble step, Eleanor, the undisputed matriarch of the family, froze. Her face contorted in sheer disgust. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she firmly grabbed Sam by his small, fragile shoulders. She aggressively shoved him behind a tall floral arrangement, pushing him entirely out of the camera's view. She hissed through her clenched, perfectly white teeth, "We cannot have those ugly mechanical devices ruining the aesthetic of our legacy. Get him out of sight." I felt the air violently rip from my lungs. Sam pulled his hands back and stared down at his little shiny shoes. He didn't cry, and that was somehow worse. It was as if he had already learned to shrink himself in places where he was not wanted. He was only 6, but he already knew how to disappear inside himself. But what was infinitely more devastating than her cruelty was the reaction of the others. My husband simply looked down at his expensive watch. My sister-in-law lightly chuckled and adjusted her diamond necklace. Someone else in the back row sighed in relief, completely unbothered. In deeply toxic family environments, the absolute worst predator is not the one who strikes the blow. It is the silent enabler. When an adult publicly humiliates a vulnerable child and the surrounding family members merely smile, chuckle, or look away, they are sending a catastrophic message to that child. They are actively normalizing psychological abuse. They are proving that this horrific injustice is entirely acceptable as long as it keeps the peace. In that suffocating moment on the stairs, my husband and his family proved they would rather sacrifice the emotional safety of an innocent child than dare to challenge the fragile, fake harmony of their wealthy dynasty. They chose their flawless public image over my son's soul. That deafening, cowardly silence was the deepest, most unforgivable knife in my back. I stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of their cruelty. The grand marble staircase felt like a towering prison. For about 5 agonizing seconds, the world simply stopped spinning. I looked down at Sam. He looked up at me with wide, confused, profoundly hurt eyes. He didn't cry. And that was somehow worse. It was as if he had already learned to shrink himself in places where he was not wanted. He just slowly reached up and tried to hide his implants with his small, trembling hands. He was only 6, but he had already learned the crushing weight of shame. That single, heartbreaking gesture broke something permanently inside of me. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over my entire body. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a hysterical scene for the flashing cameras. I simply pushed past my cowardly husband, marched straight up those marble stairs and grabbed Sam's hand. I pulled him out from behind the tall floral arrangement. I knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and gently untied the stiff, uncomfortable velvet bow from his little tuxedo shirt. I wanted him to breathe. Then I stood up and looked Eleanor dead in her cold, calculating eyes. The entire foyer was dead silent. I said, "A legacy built on shame is already dead." I turned my back on the gasping elites, the relentless paparazzi, and the weak man I called my husband. I held my son's hand tightly, and we walked out the heavy oak doors into the freezing night, forever. We walked to the car in complete silence. The biting wind whipped against our faces, but I didn't feel the cold. I buckled Sam in, started the engine, and drove out of the massive iron gates without looking back. We drove for nearly an hour through the dark, quiet streets. The heater was running, but the chill of what had just happened lingered in the air. By 8:30 a.m., the very next morning, my phone was continuously vibrating on the kitchen counter. It was a barrage of aggressive messages. There was a formal email from Eleanor's lead attorney, followed by a cold text from my husband. The message was perfectly clear, completely devoid of any apology or concern for how my son was feeling. It simply stated that if I proceeded to leave, if I embarrassed the Sterling family publicly and filed for divorce, they would entirely sever my financial allowance. They threatened to freeze our joint accounts, cut off the family trust, and bankrupt me in court. They wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing. I stared at the bright screen for a long time. I let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. Many manipulative abusers use financial power as a ruthless weapon for emotional extortion. They deeply believe that because they provided you with a luxurious lifestyle, or offered financial aid during hard times, they possess the divine right to trample over your fundamental human dignity. They think money buys your silence. They think it buys your child's soul. But the truth is, gratitude must never, ever be exchanged for your self-worth. A financial allowance or a family trust fund is just a transaction. It is just currency. It can be earned back with sweat, tears, and time. But the shattered self-worth of a deeply traumatized child cannot be repaired by any bank account in the world. You cannot buy back a child's dignity once you allow toxic people to strip it away. Refusing their financial control is the terrifying, yet absolutely necessary first step to reclaiming your freedom. I put the phone face down on the counter. I didn't reply to the attorney. I didn't reply to my husband. Instead, I called a pro bono legal clinic. I instructed my new lawyer to draft the divorce papers immediately and explicitly state that I was refusing every single dime of their hush money. I did not want their alimony. I did not want a settlement from the Sterling dynasty. I chose to embrace total, terrifying poverty to secure our absolute freedom. I packed our clothes into a few cheap suitcases and moved us into a tiny, cramped apartment on the other side of the city. We slept on a deflating air mattress for the first 3 weeks. But every single morning Sam woke up smiling. He wore his cochlear implants with absolute pride, knowing that nobody in our home would ever hide him away again. The next 2 years were a grueling, exhausting blur of pure survival. I worked 3 separate, mind-numbing jobs just to afford Sam specialized education and his medical needs. I was completely exhausted. My hands constantly ached, and my bank account was always hovering dangerously close to zero. But every single time I looked at my son, I found a reservoir of strength I never knew I possessed. Watching him try so desperately to communicate in a world that simply refused to understand him, it did not break me. It ignited an absolute inferno of determination inside my chest. I was not going to let him live in a society that treated him like an invisible burden. If the world would not listen to him, I was going to force the world to hear him. Sam was seeing a brilliant, deeply empathetic speech therapist named Dr. Evans. He was one of the very few people who looked at Sam and saw a capable, intelligent child, not a broken medical case. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, after a particularly hard session, Dr. Evans and I sat in his quiet clinic. We talked about the terrifying, heavy barrier of isolation that the deaf community faces every single day. People just walk past them. They look away because they are uncomfortable and do not know how to sign. I looked at Dr. Evans and asked, what if they didn't have to know how? What if the everyday technology in their pockets could do the translation for them? He looked at me completely stunned. And right there, in that tiny cramped clinic, an idea was born. I had no formal background in software engineering. I had a basic college degree, empty pockets, and a heart full of maternal rage. That was it. But I also had a cheap, refurbished laptop and a stable internet connection. Late at night, long after Sam was fast asleep in his small bed, I sat at our wobbly kitchen table. Fueled by cheap, stale coffee and absolute sheer will, I taught myself complex coding languages. I dove deep into the overwhelming world of artificial intelligence architecture. I collaborated obsessively with Dr. Evans, spending hundreds of hours recording thousands of subtle hand gestures, facial expressions, and spatial movements. We were meticulously training a complex AI model to read and interpret sign language in real time. There were so many agonizing nights when I wanted to just give up. The code would crash. The translation logic would completely fail. The screen would just freeze. I would put my heavy head on the keyboard and cry quietly in the dark, terrified that I was wasting precious time I could be spending with my son. But then I would remember Eleanor's cold, cruel face. I would remember her violently shoving my innocent boy behind those flowers. And I would sit right back up, wipe my tears, and type another line of code. I was transforming every single ounce of my pain, my humiliation, and my trauma into raw, executable logic. I was building a weapon of mass accessibility. After 18 months of brutal, unforgiving labor, we finally had a working prototype. I will never forget that Sunday morning. I handed my phone to Sam. I turned on the camera application we had built. He looked up at me, confused. He signed, "Good morning, Mom." Instantly, the phone speaker projected a clear, friendly, synthesized voice saying, "Good morning, Mom." Sam gasped. His eyes went incredibly wide. He looked at his hands and then at the screen. He signed again, much faster this time. "I love you." The phone spoke the words aloud perfectly. He let out a loud, joyous laugh and threw his arms around my neck. In that beautiful, profound moment, the invisible wall between him and the rest of the world completely shattered. When we finally launched the application to the public, the global response was nothing short of a seismic explosion. Within the first week, we had 100,000 downloads. Within 6 months, we had millions of active daily users all over the world. Families were finally communicating. Strangers were connecting. The deaf community embraced it as a life-changing tool. By the end of the year, massive tech conglomerates were aggressively bidding to acquire our revolutionary software. My inbox was flooded with offers from Silicon Valley giants. I moved us out of that tiny, deflating apartment and into a beautiful, secure home. I had built a formidable multi-million-dollar tech empire from the absolute ashes of my shattered life. I was no longer the frightened, financially dependent wife begging for scraps of respect. I was a CEO, which brings me exactly to this moment. Sitting in my sunlit, ultramodern tech office, staring down at the desperate multi-million-dollar contract lying perfectly on my desk. The Sterling Corporation was currently drowning in a catastrophic, highly publicized public relations nightmare. Just 3 weeks ago, a massive investigative journalism piece had completely exposed their horrific, unethical labor practices in developing countries. The internet was absolutely tearing them apart. There were daily protests outside their corporate headquarters. Their stock was rapidly plummeting, dropping lower and lower every single day. And their major investors were fleeing like rats from a rapidly sinking ship. They were bleeding millions by the hour. And Eleanor, in a move of breathtaking sociopathic audacity, thought she had found the perfect lifeline to save her dying legacy. She wanted to aggressively buy my accessibility application. She planned to launch a massive, fake marketing campaign to rebrand her crumbling, corrupt empire as a champion of disability rights and humanitarian philanthropy. She wanted to use the very same deaf community she had viciously mocked, the very same child she had violently shoved behind a floral arrangement, to save her own skin. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of it made my blood run entirely cold. My desk phone softly buzzed. My assistant spoke through the intercom. "She is waiting in the lobby, Maya." I took a slow, deep breath, letting the quiet, powerful silence of my beautiful office wash over me. I had built this room. I had built this empire from nothing. I smiled, a cold, merciless smile, and told him to send her in. The heavy glass door swung open. Eleanor walked into my office. The sharp click of her expensive heels echoed on the hardwood floor. She looked noticeably older, visibly desperate, and deeply exhausted, but she was still desperately clinging to her arrogant, high society posture. She looked around my massive office, taking in the panoramic view of the city, and I could see a brief flicker of shock in her eyes. I was no longer the poor, dependent daughter-in-law she could easily bully. She walked right up to my desk, slid the thick $50 million contract forward, and attempted a fake, heavily strained smile. "Maya," she said, her voice dripping with artificial, sickening warmth, "we are family. We have had our unfortunate misunderstandings in the past, but let us put all of that behind us now. You have built something truly wonderful here. We are so proud of you. Let us make a highly profitable arrangement that benefits everyone. Let us bring you back into the fold where you belong." I didn't say a single word at first. I just let her sit there, drowning in the crushing, heavy silence of the room. I looked down at her perfectly manicured hands, remembering with perfect clarity how those exact hands had ruthlessly grabbed my 6-year-old son's fragile shoulders. I remembered the cold wind on our faces the night we walked out of her mansion. I slowly reached out and picked up her heavy contract. I looked her directly in her cold, calculating eyes. I didn't break contact for a single second. Then I casually leaned to my right, held the thick stack of papers over the roaring mechanical shredder next to my desk, and simply let it drop. The loud, violent grinding sound of the heavy metal blades slicing through her $50 million lifeline was absolute poetry. It was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. Eleanor violently gasped, her fake smile completely vanishing in an instant. She jumped up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, finally dropping the elegant, refined act. I leaned forward across my desk, resting my hands on the cool glass. I kept my voice perfectly calm, entirely devoid of any emotion, barely above a whisper. I said, "You are a little too late, Eleanor. I actually sold the exclusive corporate licensing rights to your biggest corporate rival at 8 a.m. this morning, for exactly half the price you just offered." The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow ghost. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She began to rapidly hyperventilate, taking short, panicked breaths as the terrifying reality crashed down on her shoulders. She realized in that exact devastating second that I had just handed total irreversible corporate destruction directly to her worst enemies. I had given them the ultimate public relations weapon to bury the Sterling dynasty forever. She weakly reached out her shaking hand toward the shredder, as if she could somehow tape the shredded pieces of her legacy back together. I pointed straight toward the heavy glass door. "Get out of my building," I commanded. "And never, ever speak my son's name again." The Sterling Corporation officially filed for massive, humiliating bankruptcy exactly 3 months later. Their flawless high society legacy was completely reduced to ash in the public eye. Their grand mansions were sold, their perfect portraits were taken down, and the fake harmony they so desperately protected was finally exposed to the entire world. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity for them. Sam is now 11 years old. He is incredibly confident, deeply loved, and fiercely proud of exactly who he is. He plays on a local soccer team, he signs rapidly with his new friends, and his loud, beautiful laughter fills our home every single day. When I look at him today, standing tall and entirely unashamed, I know that walking out into that freezing night was the greatest decision I ever made. You see, when children are young, they fundamentally lack the capacity to independently form their own self-worth. They view themselves entirely through the psychological lens provided by the adults around them. If you surround a child with a clear lens of unconditional acceptance, they will truly believe they are invaluable. They will walk through life knowing they belong. But if you allow toxic adults to force them to look through a cracked, distorted lens of disgust, shame, and conditional love, They will permanently believe they are a tragic mistake. They will spend their entire lives trying to shrink themselves to fit into places that were never meant for them. Many people will tell you that family is family, that you should just forgive and forget for the sake of keeping the peace. But the ultimate sacred duty of a parent is not to desperately preserve the superficial fake illusion of a happy extended family. Your absolute duty is to violently smash those distorted lenses before they ever have the chance to cut into your child's fragile soul. You are the absolute guardian of their reality. Never be afraid to burn down a toxic bridge if the flames light the way to your child's safety. If this story ignited a fire within you, or if you are fighting to protect your own child's worth, please subscribe to this channel. Every single week, we share real stories of people finding the quiet courage to walk away from toxicity and build beautiful lives from the ashes. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and join a community that believes in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. We will see you in the next one.